So for our first episode of 2023, we have Nicole Carson here with us, who is the founder of High Hopes Counseling. High Hopes Counseling is located right on Chapman Avenue, and it provides low-cost mental health services for the Fullerton community and beyond.
Okay, all right.
So let's kind of start with your academic background. You know, you're local to Fullerton, you have ties with the Observer. Let's talk a little bit about where your academic journey began.
Okay, well, my academic journey began at Fullerton College in 1990.
What a good year.
Gosh, the 90s at Fullerton College. So I was at Fullerton College for 7 years, and that was because I had an interest in so many things. And so I worked on the magazine there, and I ended up leaving Fullerton College with an environmental science degree, transferred to Cal State Fullerton, and I was there for 2 years. I eventually accelerated, and I went into the communications program there, journalism degree, and that was my journey at that time, right? And then I went back and got a master's degree about 10 years later, and so I have a master's degree in counseling psychology. And then I also have a credential, a student counseling credential. So that allowed me to be able to do mental health in the schools, and also they required that about a decade ago. You couldn't just be a therapist and work in the school district. They also wanted something called this PPS degree. So I pursued that post my master's degree to be able to show up and work in the schools. Also, my training as an intern started in the Fullerton School District as well.
Wow.
So that kind of brings me full circle. So many ties, right? So I started at Buena Park High School, and I worked with the kiddos in the special education department. And that really gave me my first exposure to working with clients that were impacted by trauma and having these adverse childhood experiences that were impacting their education. And that's really where my passion started, with working with students and people and these what they're called ACEs. So
you're such a great lifelong learner, and I love that you brought up the 7 years at Fullerton College, because I think that's the perfect place to explore all of your interests. I've seen so many people be like, oh my god, I'm there for more than 3 years, and you know, they get stressed out about it, but I think it's the perfect space to actually explore until you figure out what it is.
Well, and you know what, I feel that way too. There's actually a lot of stigma attached, right, to even pursuing education for longer than a traditional 4-year or maybe 5-year, right? Like sometimes people are like, you know, like, what's is there something wrong? And actually sometimes there is. Sometimes there's undiagnosed mental health treatment, you know, mental health issues going on.
Right.
And so, and sometimes it just takes a while to figure out what we want to do, right? And some of us just pursue all kinds of things, and then eventually it clicks. And I think that's okay too, and being kind with ourselves, right?
I feel like that's how it actually should be, because we are trained to pick out what we want to do for the rest of our lives in high school, which is such a terrible time to be picking it out, because high school is just awful. I don't think anybody would disagree with me on that. It's just it's a weird, awful phase in your life. How are you supposed to be picking your career at that time? But we do, and that's what I did. I ended up changing my major, but still, like, it's just, not everybody gets to do that. Some people want to do it multiple times, but they kind of, because of that stigma, they aren't able to, and they get stuck in these careers or majors that they actually hate. So
I was going to say, I actually see a lot of clients that are in that boat, right? They're starting to pursue they're pursuing their education, and it's not necessarily what they thought they wanted to, and then they're scared to change it, or they have pressure from parents or, you know, or society, and then they graduate and they're not happy with what they pursued, and then kind of figuring out those pieces of what they can transfer, what skills they can transfer over, and then again building that piece of listening to self and trusting that we can pursue what we're passionate about, and that the money will follow. I think that's one of the fears in our culture also, of like, I need to do something that brings in enough money to survive.
Right. Money is such a big factor.
Yes.
And you know, you clearly were not going for that, considering you established a nonprofit that provides lower rates therapy and mental health services for people in Fullerton and beyond, right? You
Yes.
clearly weren't after the money. But where did this idea originally get established?
Well, originally it was established when I was pursuing my own mental health care. When I was 19 and at Fullerton College, that was my first exposure pursuing mental health on my own. And so at Fullerton College, they offer 6 free sessions. And then once those were over, I had to pursue counseling additionally, and I wasn't able to afford it. And so there was a counseling, it was called FACES counseling. So FACES was right across the street from Fullerton College. So that was one of the referrals. So when I went to FACES, they provided counseling on a sliding scale. And how they had the program set up, they had a clinical supervisor, and then it was graduate students that were earning their hours in an internship program. And so I liked that model and being able to help the student learn as well as myself receive services, right, and in affordability. I have so much gratitude for that space because I wouldn't have been able to have mental health treatment if they weren't around. And so at that time I thought, wow, this is really cool, and I don't know, I think that seed was planted that long ago. And I had my family, right, my kiddos, and going through the process of raising my own children and having kiddos with neurodiversity and mental health diagnosis, struggling with depression and anxiety. It really brought that full circle again and reminded me that, hey, there's still some work to do. And I knew that I wanted to go back to school for my master's. I just knew it was going to take some time and all the hours that it takes to become a therapist. Right. And that was kind of scary.
Yeah.
Right. It's so for you get your master's degree, so that was 2 years, and then it's a required 3,000 hours post your master's degree to be able to sit for your boards. And that number was a bit taunting.
3,000 is a lot. So how did that journey go for you, getting your master's degree? And I believe you got it at a non-traditional structure, what I would call it.
Yes.
So how was that journey?
Well, first off, I went back. I started substituting in Fullerton School District. So back to Fullerton, right? Full circle. So I was substituting and kind of getting a taste for, did I want to pursue education as a teacher, or did I want to pursue, I knew I wanted to pursue the mental health. Again, the numbers were kind of scary to me. And so I subbed for about a year in the Fullerton School District. And after that, I decided, you know what, I'm going to pursue my master's in counseling so I can help at a smaller level. Because after subbing in the classrooms and having 30 and 35 kiddos at a time, I noticed that there was a need, right? Like there was this need to support on a smaller level. And so that's kind of what propelled me into pursuing my master's degree. And at that time, I went to National University because they do have that non-traditional format. I looked into Cal State Fullerton because I really wanted to go back and kind of go back to my alma mater. And the way their program was set up, it would have taken me 3.5 years part-time and having my 3 kiddos and working and pursuing my master's was a lot at that time. So the program at National allowed me to take 1 class per month and be able to focus on that particular class, and that was really helpful.
I'm just so encouraged by the fact that you saw the need first with yourself, then with your kids, and with the kids at Fulton School District, and it's just not everybody would choose to pay it back to society in the way that you have done so with High Hopes Counseling. So I really would like to talk a little bit about, what does it even take to build something that you have done so in the pandemic?
Yes, gosh. Well, and in the pandemic, so in 2019, I was hired at Fullerton College to work in the health department and to provide mental health services. Right. And I ended up working in the same office where I received mental health care as a student at 19. So that was really amazing. And I really saw an intense need there as well. All the kiddos that were coming in to be seen, it was almost like there's a gap, right? And I noticed it at Fullerton College, and a severe gap of kiddos coming in either undiagnosed or really needing support with anxiety, social anxiety, depression, lots of neurodiversity, undiagnosed. And having worked in the school districts, I knew a lot about that, and so it made me curious to why these kiddos were showing up, and there was this gap.
Right.
And so during the pandemic, we went to all virtual, right? Seeing all the students. So I saw the students virtually, and during that time, I also started working on the pieces of the nonprofit and figuring out, okay, how can I fill this need? Because there just were not places that were affordable, and also that talked about trauma, and brought those pieces in. And so this is when I started talking with my friend who lives up in Oregon, and I was like, hey, I've had this idea for 30 years now, and how do we make this happen? Because she had also she has family members that are neurodiverse and kiddos with mental health challenges, and so we had done a lot of talking over the last 20 years, coping with even raising kiddos with having diagnosis or mental health challenges, and even the stigma that comes with that as a parent. Right. And so we kind of used each other to cope with those pieces, and thought, okay, it's time. How do we get this into the community? And so we'd meet, virtually and start putting together the information and brainstorming and looking into how to even start a nonprofit. I mean, we just started Googling, right. And we're like, okay, how do we do this? How do we afford, how do we afford to incorporate and all of those pieces? And so it has definitely been a journey, learning along the way.
Yeah, there's a lot, I mean, nobody else really teaches you, okay, here's how step by step you're going to build something like this. I find this part so cool. You are located so close to Fullerton College, right across from Zombie Donuts, and I believe it is Chapman Avenue, right?
It is.
It's just like the full circle in so many different ways that you've come back.
Yes.
I find that so amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. It feels amazing, right? And even to be able to say, hey, Fullerton College students, you can walk over, right? You can be supported. Come over for groups. The Fullerton High School kids. It's with Troy, right? Ladera Vista, Acacia, right? I mean, we are within reach to lots of students, and we're happy to be there.
Right. And you provide very specific services that are geared toward students and couples and younger kids and parents. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
What kind of services or tools do you provide for these different groups to cope with their mental health needs?
Well, one of the things we really wanted to make sure with High Hopes was that we made mental health easy to understand and to reduce fear and the stigma surrounding, seeking mental health treatment. So we really talk about it, and we kind of compare it to our cell phones, right? I learned that as humans, we will, myself included, we will keep pushing and pushing and going, even when we are run down and depleted and burnt out, right? And when our phones are run down and our battery's getting depleted, most of us will go and make sure it gets on a charger, right? Very few of us let our cell phone fully deplete, right? And so I was like, this is interesting, right? Like, I feel like we place more of an emphasis on making sure our electronics are charged rather than our cells. And then I was like, okay, the battery. I think this can be something tangible. It's like, all right, we have the red zone, right? And then we have the orange zone and the yellow zone and the green zone, our battery works better on our phone and our laptop when it's fully charged. And so do we. Right? And being able to break it down those ways of like, hey, when we're in the green zone, we're fully charged, we're calm, this is a relaxed state for us. And then, moving into the yellow zone, that makes us, we're starting to get maybe a little more tired. Our battery's draining a little bit. And then potentially moving into the orange, and that's where we start to feel maybe a little bit anxious or some fear. And then even with our battery, we're like, oh, I need to charge my phone. So we're trying to say, oh, where do we recognize in our body when we're in the orange zone? What do I need if I'm starting to get anxious? And then we teach the clients the tools from there. And most importantly, what does it feel like in our body when I am anxious, right? Not just the cognitive, but where is it in my body and how does it manifest? And what can I do about it? And that doesn't have to have a diagnosis, right? That can just mean like, hey, I'm scared. And that's where we teach the fight, flight, freeze, and then we tie it into trauma and learning, hey, what scares us, what triggers us, and then how do we regulate our nervous system and our emotional regulation according to our battery and ourselves, because really our emotional regulation is how we show up in the community, right, and in the world around us. So if we're in the red zone, and then we get triggered by something, it's going to be really hard to react from a kind, respectful space, right? Because we don't have it in us to give. So that's kind of the way that we're trying to make mental health and more tangible and understandable.
And I think those are such great lessons to learn, because I haven't really learned that elsewhere, right? You kind of have to start figuring out on your own, and then with your organization, students and everybody else, they can learn it at a relatively really low cost. Because I was looking up therapy in preparation for this interview. I was looking up costs. In person start at $300, $200. You can. On average, I think that it's going for $500 if you want to get some really quality, really experienced therapist, and it goes beyond that for 1 hour or one session.
I mean, especially with trauma specialists, right? I mean, I think in the community, probably the lowest rate for individual therapy with a licensed clinician is anywhere from $165 to $300, like you said. And so being able to offer it even at $50 per session with the students providing the therapy and myself supervising the students alongside, we would like to offer it for lower. I mean, that really is my goal of being able to offer, making sure everything is reduced fee. And even if we could offer it for less than $50, that would be great. But that's where we're at right now. I did try to offer it for lower, and then, I realized, there's overhead and there's all of these extra things, and so
you still need to run the organization.
We still need to run the organization. Yes.
I think $50 is a good price for a starting point.
Okay. You know what? Thank you.
Plus, you have all of these events that are sometimes cheaper than even that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
All right, so we are very big on how do we provide, how do we expose the community to what we have to offer. And so we have some groups that are starting in February. We have a teen self-esteem group and also a relationship group for teens and college students. And also we're bringing a book club on board.
Ooh, book clubs.
I know. Also open mic night for poetry, right? So we're really big about art and connecting with the artistic side and expressing. And so we want to have an open mic night where our clients and anyone in the community can come and read their poetry and share whatever art they want to express. We have some clients that make really awesome music on SoundCloud. I think that's what it's called, right?
Yes,
they share their beats with me and stuff, and so they're excited about it too.
I'm excited about that too. And people can find more information about this on your website, on your Instagram. I mean, I'm always looking through that, and you can get new events. And I think the latest one that I saw was groups for students in college and dealing with relationships, I believe it is.
Yes, yes. That's one of the things we really feel is important, is how do we learn about having a relationship with self and all the important pieces, and what does a healthy relationship look like, right? Because most times we're talking about unhealthy relationships or toxic relationships, right, in society. And so we're like, hey, what are the things that make a healthy relationship? And so also the groups that we're bringing, we are making them 4-week groups. So they're really bite-sized and digestible and affordable. So the groups that we're offering are $99 for 4 weeks. And so we're trying to be able to get people in the door, and also to be able to make it affordable.
Yeah, that's actually a really good price. I mean, these days with inflation, that's like, what, 3 meals when you're dining out, I think?
I know. It's, that's a good point that you said that, right? Because I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday, and she was like, how do we compare to that way? Because it is so expensive eating out, and being able to say, hey, sometimes it's being able to share or subsidize in a way of looking at it like, hey, rather than buying a cup of coffee out that's $7 or $8 now, or rather than going out to fast food for $20 per meal, how do we bring that funding around and put it back into the community to help mental health?
Yeah, and I think that's such a good way to look at it too, because how much are AirPods, guys? What, 190, 180?
At least.
I
maybe
mean,
250, maybe, right? I think,
there's the AirPod Max, which everyone has on now, is what, 400? So if instead of buying those things and just getting the Sony headphones for $20, we are the ones that I have. If we are to put the money into something like this and attending some more of the workshops, I think we would be able to feel much better than constantly being plugged in, which is a whole other topic we touched on last time we talked. But it's, I am so grateful and appreciative, even though I don't get to really use your services because I'm not always here, but $99 or $20 or that wine dinner that you're having for $65. I mean, all of these things are really affordable when we compare it to some other things that especially college students splurge on all the time. Concert tickets. I mean, I don't even know, what, $200 to start off with concert tickets? I think certain experiences or certain things are worth more, and definitely therapy is one of those things it's gonna pay you back longer term investment.
You know what? So. I agree. And that is a piece of how do we reduce the stigma, right, surrounded with seeking mental health services, and that is one of the pieces of how do we reduce the stigma, how do we make it affordable, and know that these are life skills, right? We're learning skills that are taken outside of the office and implemented in everyday life. And the more we practice them, just like riding a bike, right, the better we're going to get at them. Right? And then we're going to be able to regulate ourselves, we're going to be able to understand ourselves better, and then we're going to be able to go out into the community and serve better, right? And
yeah, I think that's very worth it. So while we're on the topic of stigma of mental health, let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Because I think our generation Gen Z specifically, has gotten a little better with that. We do talk about it, but that doesn't always mean we have the courage to make that first appointment or make that call and say, you know what, I need help with this, and can I get an appointment? That is still a hurdle for many of us.
Yes.
How do we overcome that?
Well, I think more and more when we talk about it, even in less clinical terms, right, and being able to say like, hey, most of us get sad, or I think also all of us going through the pandemic, right, worldwide, I feel like all of us were impacted in some way and understood what it felt even potentially to feel anxious, right, some of those underlying feelings, and then being able to say, hey, all right, I feel anxious before I take a test sometimes, right, or I felt anxious before coming here today, right, and being able to implement the coping skills, right, and making them tangible, like, oh, okay, I can take some breaths when I stop at a stoplight, right? I don't have to sit and do meditation for 10 minutes to feel better. I can have mental health bites, right? Or just awareness, self-awareness, and mindfulness. And there's also ways that we can use the cell phone, even to text, if there's stigma, even, or if even making phone calls hard, because sometimes even making a phone call is hard, right? And I didn't realize that, because most times making phone calls for me was easy. And then my oldest had a lot of social anxiety around making phone calls. And my brain was like, well, you talk to the people you video game with all the time, right? Like, it doesn't sound like you have a hard time making phone calls. And then as we learn more, and even that's that parent education piece, and even education for, everyone of, hey, sometimes we're just more anxious in other areas, and then we need to learn skills to push through it and to lean in. So if the phone call's hard, how do we use this tool, the cell phone, when it is charged? And there is a number you can text. It's 741-741. And if you text that number and text hello to it, someone will respond, and they will provide services and resources via text and communicate with you until you feel better. And so I think there's more and more ways that we can get help.
Is there a number we can text for your organization, or email perhaps?
You know what? There is an email. We have an email, info@highhopescounseling.org, and that goes right to our secretary, who is monitoring our email on a daily basis, and we do reach out. We don't have a 24-hour service available at this time. But crisis work is something that eventually we are interested in bringing into High Hopes. All of the dreams and the possibilities. But I would say the 988 number, which that's also another great thing, right? Like this year, rather than calling that big long number, right? Now folks can call 988 and know that there's someone on the line.
Yeah, these are all great resources, and thank you for sharing them with us. While we're talking about resources, I did want to ask you about some book recommendations that can help us learn more about mental health or mental clarity, or all of these things. So what recommendations do you have for the listeners?
Well, I would say one of the very influential people in my education and along the journey has been Bruce Perry. And he is very big on trauma-informed and education of teaching about, he calls them the big T's and the little T's. As most people, when we think of trauma, most people will think war, car accident, murder, right? And there are lots of things. Trauma is how we perceive an experience that we've had. So some of the little T's, right, are if someone's maybe raised their voice at us and we felt scared, right, or we were in an environment where we weren't getting all the food that we needed, or there's a lot of different ways that we experience trauma. If we're unable to perform, maybe in school, right, and how a teacher responds to us, and it's how we process that and how we internalize it, and there's a shame and different pieces involved in that. And so Bruce Perry has really talked about, hey, how do we realize when kiddos are struggling, there's a reason. It's not because they want to have these outbursts or behave a certain way. And so he's really big on we show, right? We externalize and we behave how we're feeling inside. And so Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey got together and collaborated. She's done a great job also over the years, right, of educating mainstream, right, and bringing these topics to the table to talk about. And so her and Bruce Perry actually wrote a book together, and it's called What Happened to You. And so it talks about different experiences that we have growing up, and experiencing life and how that shapes us and how we react and respond to things. Actually, that is going to be one of the books that we read in the book club. Yes, yeah. And there's another book, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. That is another really good book. His name is Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he is one of the founding clinicians, medical doctors that talks about trauma and how these experiences that we have reside in our bodies and like keep a memory imprint. And unless we are able to process those experiences, we will continue to have maladaptive behaviors around them. And so he's really created different somatic therapy, so more in the body, right? Not just cognition, not just talking, not talk therapy, right? The talk therapy, but also going into the body. So that's really why we talk about, hey, where do we feel it? When we feel scared, where do you feel it in your body? How does it manifest? Right? Sometimes our heart starts beating faster, our hands will start sweating, right? And being able to recognize how our sympathetic nervous system responds, right? And so he talks about all of that in the book. I think it's a good way to understand how we are impacted by trauma and how it shapes us and how we can learn to feel better.
Yeah, that's also another great recommendation in my hand. I just realized when you said it, this one is sweating right now. And it's not hot in here, it's just maybe I'm nervous.
Well, and and I think this is an important piece, is right, like when we do get nervous, our hands sweat, our digestion, right, all of our, it's the vagus nerve, right? So this is the nerve that's attached to the base of our brain and to our gut, and then it's attached to all of the organs. And so when we do start to feel anxious, sad, or really when we're triggered into fight or flight, and that's really what he talks about, and it goes all the way back to the brain believes that it's fight, flight, really. I'm either going to live or die, right? Like I have to either fight or run. And that is really what's happening and in our environment where we are so overstimulated all the time, right? Most times we are in fight, flight. Most of us are trying to relax more. We're trying to get to the green zone, right? We do this through, lots of people do it through this now.
Yeah, keep scrolling.
Right? Scrolling, right? Because our phone gives us endorphins, right? It does make us feel, well, for a temporary time, it makes us feel better, right? And so it's being able to know and how to regulate that nervous system. And lots of times people try to get into the green zone more quick with substances, right? That will calm the nervous system quicker. It's just not as healthy of a coping skill as meditating, right? And being able to get into the zone via meditating. So that's another piece of what we like to talk about at High Hopes, of reducing that stigma of lots of us use unhealthy coping skills, right? We work too much. We may spend too much money. We may watch too much TV or eat too much or be on our cell phones too much. And how do we find a balance? And not be afraid to talk about it. Right. And that's the piece, right? Not to be afraid to talk about it. I think that's one of the biggest things with High Hopes is we want to create that space where parents can come and say, hey, this is what we've been through. There's not a lot of spaces that feel safe without shame, and I think that's one of the pieces, even for myself as a parent, right? Going through having kiddos with, that are needing more intensive treatments, and there's not really a place to talk about that. And so there's a lot of parents that feel alone, and then you start talking, you're like, oh wait, that happened in your family? Oh, that's happening in your family? Oh, you have a homeless brother? right? Oh, you have a kiddo that needed a hospitalization to be able to restabilize, and those are the pieces we really want to be able to talk about. You don't have to be alone, that's the piece. You're not alone. And how do we make that accessible?
Right.
And reduce that stigma.
There's lots of moving pieces, and I think there's
so
a lot
many
of places that High Hopes can come into action. And I'm just excited. It's a new venture. It's not exactly a startup, but it is a startup. Is it a startup? It's a nonprofit?
Well, gosh, I don't know.
We'll just call it a startup.
Okay.
I think it's a startup, and there's so much exciting stuff to come. So I'm very excited for that. And we'll put all of the links for High Hope's website and social media and how to contact you. All of that in our description, the video. So my last question before I let you go. Who other cool person from all this time that you spent in Fullerton do you think we should be interviewing on this podcast to learn more about that?
I think one of the businesses in the community that I have followed along the journey has been Monkey Business Cafe.
Yes.
I had a garden over at at the Arboretum, right?
Yes.
Over at Cal State Fullerton, in the Arboretum, and they had a garden there also, and they may still, but I thought it was really cool that they were growing food there, and they were sourcing that out of their restaurant. And not just, that is an awesome piece in and of itself.
Right.
But also the piece of where they work within the community to provide work and to train youth, right? Foster youth, I believe. So kiddos that have been in the system or are in the system, they're providing them job training and skills to be able to earn a living and survive in the world. And I think that's really awesome.
I love Monkey Business Cafe. I like their food. I've been there multiple times, and I think they are still doing the partnership with Cal State Fullerton.
Okay.
So
that's wonderful. I first learned about them actually when I was writing an article for the newspaper at Cal State Fullerton, and I was interviewing foster youth there.
Amazing.
And so that human service, I've always had that human service nonprofit vibe, I believe, about myself.
I'm so appreciative that you use the for-profit model to actually help out the community and Fullerton in so many different ways. So I really hope to see High Hopes Counseling grow from here, and I hope that some of our team members and some people that I know can use your services and grow themselves as people through that.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to seeing more members in the community come through. We're going to be having an open house in the spring, I believe in April, and then again in the fall, where we're open for a Sunday afternoon and having snacks and drinks and everyone just being able to come in and touch all the items, sit on the couch, right? Like we're all about having fidgets and things that can help regulate. I use a whiteboard often, We're very much a relaxed environment. We try to make it that way. So we have snacks and tea. And sometimes that makes it easier to talk about things that are difficult.
It does. It definitely does. So as we wrap up this interview, I would like to give a shout out to Buddha and Dharma, who have been so calm. Can you get a little shot of them?
Look at them.
They have been here throughout the entire interview, just sitting here calmly, letting their mom do all the work.
I know, look at them. Buddha and Dharma, they're the original therapy dog for my oldest, who ended up doing home health, and I did homeschooling for him the last couple years of his high school. And Buddha and Dharma would always just hang out and chill. And now I look back and go, oh, you know what? Now there's a term for it, right? The emotional support animals, and
they are that. And this is a great perk of going to High Hopes Counseling. If you are considering, you get to see both Buddha and Dharma in action.
It's true. Sometimes the clients, if I show up without the dogs, the clients are like, where are Buddha and Dharma? And I'm like, excuse me, are you here for Buddha and Dharma, or are you here for us? And they're like, don't make me answer that question. I'm like, and it's interesting, I never brought them to work with me, but once the pandemic happened and they were we were around each other all the time. Once we started going back to work and they were at home by themselves, they were like, no, we don't like this. So, no, Buddha and Dharma are with me often.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they are. They are, just the best buddies you could have. And they have been such great support to us during this interview. So, thank you for bringing them along. Thank you for being here today. We really appreciate everything you're doing with the community. We hope to see your work in the Fulton Observer someday.
Thank you.
Another circle that you're completing that.
Well, and I just want to give you guys a shout out because I also appreciate what you're doing in the community.
Thank you.
Interviewing all the different businesses and educating the community about what's happening here in Fullerton. That means a lot because, gosh, there's so many things happening.
Lots of stuff in Fullerton.
If the more we talk about it and we get it out there. And even evolving from the newspaper, from the print to this. I mean, you guys you're doing great. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our team is where a lot of us are from Fulton College too. I think Fulton College embeds the spirit within you to give back to the community. I don't know how exactly they do it, but they do it.
Yeah, gosh, I think it potentially is the staff that works there.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think there's that vibe there. My magazine teacher, Larry, I can't remember his last name, but Larry knew when I was struggling. He did, and he would be like, "Hey, Nicole, do you need anything?" Or, "Hey, do you need some money for food?"
Yeah.
And I will never forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just those people that I've seen that
it is, yeah.
Make the biggest difference in your life.
That's true.
Yeah. So shout out to Fullerton College.
Yes, go Hornets.
In conclusion,
Yes, yeah.